Into the Bog by Mr. Moo H.L. If one takes a walk through the bog outside of town on moonlit nights, it is said that one may find a great deal of uncanny things. Take care not to stray from the common path, for the marshlands are vast, confusing, and unfriendly to mortal souls. Keeping these thoughts close at hand, I gaze back to the soft glow of the village's oil lanterns before turning around and making my way down the hill towards the bog. As I approached the tree line, I held up my personal lamp and began to search for the entry point. I didn't want to be doing this, but I had promised Mrs. Grader that I'd help look for her kid. Alice was her name, and she had earned quite the reputation as an explorer at the young age of 6. We asked around, but nobody had seen Alice for several hours, and it was already dark. I knew then that she had probably gotten lost in the bog. I don't care how adventurous they are, no child wants to be away from home and warmth so late at night. So there I was, feet squishing in the soft earth as the damp smell of marsh enveloped me. Scum hung from the branches, casting long and distorted shadows in the wake of my lamp's glow. Clouds of insects filled the air as I stepped over festering pools of muck. After about 15 minutes of walking and calling Alice's name, I heard a small voice. Hello? I turned to face the noise and saw her standing there. Her tiny self was a short ways down a small trail off to my right. I could practically feel how cold she was just from looking at her. I mean, the poor thing was shaking so much. I called her over, telling her that everything was okay and that I was there to bring her home. Still shivering, she walked over to me. Relieved that I had found the girl and could now get the hell out of there, I picked her up and began walking back the way I came. While I was carrying her, I began to notice that she felt a bit heavier than a 6-year-old girl should feel. I figured that it was due to the fact that her clothes were completely soaked through with the dark marsh water. It wasn't long before Alice began to make these groaning noises, like the kind a kid makes when their tummy is upset. I began to worry that she might be getting sick and picked up my pace. The noises she was making began to sound deeper and more erratic. Suddenly, they no longer sounded like they belonged to a small child, but an agitated animal. Her body had begun heaving with each sound, violently convulsing in my arms. I held my lamp close to get a better look, and in that moment, what was supposed to be Alice's lips and teeth had extended off of her face, as if reaching out towards me. In my shock, I dropped her, and as she fell, I saw her elongated mouth snap at me, her unnaturally long fingers grasping upwards. She landed in a puddle of muck and dirty water, and I began to run. I didn't stop until I broke through the tree line. The fear coursing through me didn't make it any easier to see Mrs. Grader's face when she opened the door to see me standing there without her child in tow. As I explained to her what had happened, I could see tears form in her eyes. Mrs. Grader was a wise old woman. She didn't accuse me of being a coward, but she also fully understood that she was never going to see her daughter again. If one takes a walk through the bog outside of town on moonlit nights, it is said that one may find a great deal of uncanny things. Take care not to stray too far from the common path, for the marshlands are vast, confusing, and unfriendly to mortal souls. Venture out only if you must, and never too deep, lest the bog claim you for its own. Come to Her by Chamber Gambit. The woods behind Mary Jane's house did not make her feel safe. They were thick with old, twisted trees, whose branches scratched her like bony fingers. The crescent moon overhead did not provide much light for her to see, so as she ran, she couldn't avoid the harsh brush or the sharp rocks jutting from the ground. Her bare feet caught on something, maybe a root or a stone, sending her tumbling to the ground. She lay there on the cold grass for a moment, too scared and weak to pull herself up. Sweat made the cuts from the branches and thorns sting, adding to the pain from old and new bruises on her body. Taking a deep breath, she pushed her head up and took a look around. Her eyes strained to see in the dense fog what she appeared to be in a clearing. Pain shot up her arms and her back as she got up to her feet and brushed the dirt off her thin cotton dress. What sounded like a bird cried out as it leapt from one branch to another. Mary Jane jumped at the sound, turning about on her heels and praying for something to see. If she could just find a squirrel or an owl, something to indicate the forest's innocence, maybe her heart would stop pounding. There was nothing. She sighed, wiping the sweat from her brow and the tears from her cheeks. The woods were not safe, but the eerie emptiness was infinitely better than bearing the brunt of her father's drunken wrath back home. She could stay here for a while, wait until he would surely be asleep, then make her way back to the house. Leaves rustled in the wind, sending shivers up her spine. She swallowed and licked her lips, quietly telling herself that she was alone. Mary Jane repeated it in her mind like a mantra. I'm alone. I am alone. A glint of light flashed beyond the trees, and more leaves rustled. Twigs snapped. Anxiety creeped into Mary Jane's chest, feeling almost as if her heart shriveled like a raisin. She shivered and folded her arms closely to her chest for warmth. That yellow glimmer appeared again, 2 dots somewhere in the distance. Mary Jane forced herself to look down at her feet and continue her mantra. I am alone. I am alone. She closed her eyes and rocked back and forth on her heels to the rhythm of the words in her head. I am alone. I am alone. She ignored the sounds of twigs and leaves, even as they grew louder. I am alone. A pant of warm, humid breath fell on her forehead. Mary Jane ran for it, bolting back in the direction of her isolated mountain house. Anxious, terrified nausea filled her stomach, contorting her insides as she ran. Tears in her eyes obscured her sight even further. Darkness seemed like it could envelop her completely. She couldn't escape. She wasn't alone. She wasn't going to make it. She, Mary Jane, stopped under the light of her back porch. She could hear nothing but static from the old TV inside, along with her father's faint snores. With a sigh of relief, she climbed up the porch steps to the screen door. The steps creaked under her feet. Resting her head against the screen door, she wondered where she would go now that the woods were no longer the lesser of 2 evils. Taking a deep breath, she pulled the door open and stepped inside. As she quietly closed the door, trying not to wake her father, Jane saw those yellow eyes in the darkness just beyond the trees. She froze, the hair on her neck standing on end. In the next room, her father coughed and grumbled in his sleep. She flinched at the sound, instinctively closing her eyes and holding up her hands in defense. When no blow came, she relaxed just enough to look into the darkness once more. Whatever was out there was still staring at her, perhaps even into her. Her heart pounding, Mary Jane took a step away from the door. Her hand lingered on the latch for a moment, but she pulled away, leaving it hanging. If there was nowhere to go, then it would come to her. Dead Woods by Phantom 1112. The Scare. Summer was coming to a close, so my friends and I wanted to hang out as much as possible before we were busy with schoolwork. Myself, along with 5 others, decided to go to my friend Tyler's house to spend the night and play Slender, a game about the infamous Slender Man. After a couple hours of scary fun and jokes, we decided to further scare ourselves by going into the woods. Tyler lived near our school, and behind it was a path that the cross-country team practiced on. It had no lights on the path, and no house was nearby. We traveled there by the railroad tracks, since that was the quickest way. Then we'd cut through an opening into the woods. As you can imagine, there are many rumors shrouding the woods, as there are with most. Violent, homeless people living there. The spirits of those who died near the woods or tracks, haunting it relentlessly. Feeling an urge to kill as a means of releasing anger. Just about anything from fiction to non-fiction. Despite this, we thought it'd be fun for the sake of being scared, and figured with 6 people total, we'd be more than able to defend ourselves. We only had 2 flashlights, so it was pretty hard to see, but we managed down the track slowly. We had heard noises in the tree line on either side, sounds of sticks being snapped or objects, probably rocks, being tossed or thrown. We stopped and huddled together, shined our flashlights into the tree lines, but could see nothing. Could hear nothing, except for 1 or 2 people discussing what they think made the sounds. We kept on, and finally found the opening. Reluctantly, we went into the woods, huddled together so that we could keep a close eye on each other and stay close to the flashlights. We had seen markings on the trees in what looked to be red paint. While most of us knew that some of the trees were marked for cross-country practice, these markings shared no resemblance to the ones along the path. The wording was improper, usually illegible. Some were even drawings of what looked to be people. We didn't question it for too long. It was obvious the only thing on everyone's mind was if whatever they heard before would eventually find them, and what it would be. We saw lights in the distance from the school but decided to turn away from them, lost in thought and discussion. Our fear had lightened, and we were having fun now, just talking and joking. Unfortunately, that liveliness died pretty quick when we heard something run alongside us through the trees. We were all in a dead silence, looking around, listening for the sound again, but heard absolutely nothing. We joked some more to lighten the mood and eventually came back around to the school. We had made it through the woods. Well, almost. 2 of our friends told us to wait back whilst they went ahead, no doubt to try and scare us. We didn't listen and left the woods shortly after they left, but didn't see them in the large field. We all knew they were trying to scare us, but just for shits and giggles, I decided to go back to where we left the woods and saw someone moving behind a hill. I just saw their head, but when I tried to get closer, they ran back into the woods. Finally, my phone vibrated, and I saw that one of them was calling me, so I answered, and in a panic, my friend told me to go into the woods again, then hung up. I went back to the school to tell everyone what was going on, and they followed me back, and we all went in. I called for them but got no response. I tripped over something and fell kinda hard. Looking back at what I had tripped on, I saw the body of my friend. His face shaved nearly off, his hair completely gone. Blood pooled from his head along with multiple wounds scattering his body. I backed away and yelled, but didn't get up. I was scared, wasn't thinking straight. Tyler came over and stopped dead in his tracks when he saw the body. He came around to get me and took me away. We heard another yell, a blood-curdling one like someone was in pain. We ran towards the sound to find the two others who had entered the woods with us. Another one was dead, the other alive, a man gutting him. Another a woman wearing a long, tattered dress soaked with blood, taking out his eyes. His screams were too much. I didn't try to help, didn't even grab Tyler. I just ran, fast, back towards the school. Hanging in my path was the other two that had gone ahead of us. A rope was tied around his neck. His legs were missing, and where his eyes should have been were bundles of leaves. I had to keep going. I had to run. So I did. I ran towards the school hoping I wouldn't be chased, but all I heard were voices all around me. Voices yelling, voices laughing. Some just talking. I tried to ignore them, but only because I recognized them. They were the voices of my friends. I ran by the school and noticed a light coming on through the windows. A blue light from the smartboard. I stopped and looked in the room, and saw a man sitting at one of the desks, rocking back and forth, fiddling with something in his hands. Something I could not see. I kept running until I was out of energy, which wasn't too much further. I didn't hear anything behind me. I stopped hearing voices. I sat down and closed my eyes, trying to think about what had just happened. It was a dream. I'd just wake up in my house. But when I opened my eyes, what I saw wasn't my ceiling. I saw a person looming over me, his face nearly gone, the same way my friend's face was. But it wasn't him. He had shackles around his wrists and ankles, short chains connected to them. He had something with him, a stick or a pipe, something blunt. He whispered, "I hate having to do this, but she loves it. I must do it for her. She loves it. She loves it when I kill. She promised that if I loved others for her, she'd love me in return." I tried to crawl back, but before I could, he broke my leg with it. I tried not to yell, but when he broke the other one, I couldn't help it. He wrapped his hands around my wrists and dragged me back into the woods, back into the horror. Grass by Tiger the Loser. I'm sure you're fond of winter, when the crisp season of fall abruptly cuts to an end, and quickly the dark grey clouds in the heavens above form over our heads, letting a white, soft mass of perfectly frozen snowflakes ease off of their non-existent shoulders. This snow can vary from soft, gentle, and delicate, creating but a thin layer of pure white on top of the cold ground, to harsh, unmerciful storms of furious cold and wind, throwing the unwilling snow in every which direction. But alas, it seems as though us feeble humans have forgotten about what becomes trapped underneath the sparkling, crystalline precipitation every season. What remains living of the frozen ground, cut off and deafened to the world above. What is left to fend her off underneath the blistering blanket of ice? The living, breathing creature that we all neglect as unimportant, who we could care less about. Grass. It may seem silly, but put yourself in that situation. Would living exposed to the winter cold and snow be any enjoyable experience? Most people think that these small blades of green can't feel it, or they've fallen asleep for the winter. That is nonsense. It is scientifically proven that these poor plants stay conscious for every second of the day. Although they do not function physically or emotionally like we do, they are still technically alive. Who knows? Those herbaceous plants may be silently mourning when the first winter breeze comes upon them. How they dread the day of the first snowfall that will tragically torture them to the brink of death. Sometimes, after the harsh winds of winter have finished and gone away, and spring abundantly thaws the earth with warmth and rain, you see light brown patches of grass on the lawn. Those are the grass that weren't able to survive the deadly evil cold and have to suffer to the point of death. We merely ignore this and only care about the looks of the lawn and how ugly it now appears after winter has taken its toll. We are selfish, disgusting creatures who could care nothing about the lives of other beings. Things we think aren't correct, that aren't perfect in our minds, no longer have meaning to us. Things that we don't describe as cute, we push off into the dust. We must change our despicable ways before it's too late. Before realization arrives much too late to our incompetent minds, and we are faced with consequences in the beyond. A Garden by H.P. Lovecraft. There's an ancient garden that I see sometimes in dreams, where the very Maytime sunlight plays and glows with spectral gleams, where the gaudy tinted blossoms seem to wither into grey, and the crumbling walls and pillars weaken thoughts of yesterday. There are vines in nooks and crannies, and there are moss about the pools, and the tangled weedy thicket chokes the arbor dark and cool. In the silent sunken pathways springs an herbage sparse and spare, where the musty scent of dead things dulls the fragrance of the air. There is not a living creature in the lonely space around, and the hedge-encompassed quiet never echoes to a sound. As I walk and wait and listen, I will often seek to find, when it was I knew that the garden in an age long left behind. I will oft conjure a vision of a day that is no more. As I gaze upon the grey scenes I feel I knew before, then a sadness settles over me. A tremor seems to start. For I know the flowers are shriveled hopes. The garden is my heart. In a Flash by Vermin Goat. Every year, tourists embark on overnight hikes into the wilderness of Chugach National Forest, a stunning piece of southern Alaska, returning with a fantastic experience that they will never forget. They relive it in their dreams and go over the astonishing details at campfires, spreading the word about the cradle of natural unity. This ends up sending more excited travelers into its mesmerizing depths to see such majestic beauty that no other region on Earth could come close to. The human mind is hardwired to block memories too traumatizing to process, often leaving behind a non-linear blurred mess. That is not always enough. People subconsciously base their behavior in certain situations on past experiences, which is why such blackouts are automatically intermeshed with brief imagery flashbacks, inserting mundane false memories to remerge an experience to a consistent timeline. So, why do those who have spent extended periods of time in that particular forest often say that days can go by in a flash?